Well, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for taking care of such a beautiful venue. It feels really good to preach in your own church, finally. Literally, almost. Talking about preaching, probably the most well-known preacher these days is Trump. But we also have a very nice reaction to that. So I think most of you have seen the YouTube by Arjen Lubach on America First, the Netherlands Second. And I'm also, let's say, a bit annoyed of the title of this conference, the Netherlands, the next hotspot of innovation. But we have, of course, been a hotspot of innovation for a long time. The Netherlands is probably one of the few countries that has been the top 10 most prosperous countries over centuries. Of course, centuries ago, most countries didn't exist, but this region of the world, so to say. With the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, the first stock-listed firm of the world. But also in the late 1900s, early 1900s, late 1800s, world-leading firms have been established here, like Shell, Philips, Fokker, Unilever, and more recently, firms that you probably have faced yourself, and also in the morning part of this program, TomTom, by Frans Peter Pauls, a student of the U.S.E some years ago, so you could also be the next TomTom, so to say. Booking.com, also a world-known leader in online booking, also set up by a student from University of Twente. So you might think these are gigantic firms and this is far from your bedside, so to say, but you can be the next founder of a Booking or TomTom. And most recently, Adyen, a bit of a hidden champion in the Netherlands, but a payment services firm that takes care of a lot of online payments in the Netherlands and abroad, and has had a lot of funding. So the Netherlands has been a great place for entrepreneurship. So why should we sort of worry about it being the great place for entrepreneurship in the future? Also, if you look at the most recent dynamics, so we do a lot of research here on entrepreneurship and the context of entrepreneurship. There's a remarkable increase of startups in the Netherlands. So this is based on the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, the largest worldwide data collection effort on entrepreneurship. In the early 2000s, about 4% of the adult population, so it's the orange line here, was involved in starting up a business in the Netherlands, and it has more than doubled over a decade. So in your biography, the Netherlands has become even more entrepreneurial. And we're still second, America first, the Netherlands second, but we're in advance of other countries like Sweden, the UK, and Germany. So this is all good news. But well, as an academic, you're not asked to only tell good news, also to be skeptic and perhaps say a few words about reality that most people don't like, or perhaps think about reality critically. And the good news is, at least about the bad news, is that we have good data about what happens in the Netherlands. So this is not just a glorious Schumpeterian story of more innovative startups, ambitious high-growth firms, unicorns. So these are firms that are valued with $1 billion. No, in the Netherlands, the rise of entrepreneurship over the last decade and a half has especially been a rise of solopreneurs. So people that, for many different reasons, have become an entrepreneur, very often part-time. So we are number one in part-time labor in the world. So it's America, of the Netherlands first, America not even second. But if you look at the rise of startups in the Netherlands, it's very much about solopreneurs. These can be very creative consultants that make a very nice living, superstars. But it can also be people that are forced into entrepreneurship because they could not get a job in their previous employer anymore. And a lot of them are part-time employed as well. That might also be a good thing, because if you're a part-time entrepreneur, you can also experiment and see what works, what doesn't work, and keep all their income next to it. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's typically of the Netherlands that there has been the rise of entrepreneurship has very much been a rise of solo self-employed, which I always say you can have thousands self-employed, but that doesn't make a new Google. So we also have to be a bit careful that perhaps we're not the hotspot that we think we are. And by the way, the straight line is the number of new firms with employees, and that has been stable all over this period. And if you would like to make an impact in the world, you're probably going to do that with a team, not on your own. So in that sense, this graph of the Netherlands is not too nice. And I would make it even worse. So we also ask these people that are involved in setting up a business what their ambitions are. Do you just want to employ yourself, or do you want to set up a small firm, let's say to 5 employees, or a big firm beyond 20 employees? And here you see all these nice stacks with Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, UK, Israel. I think there's a very nice lecture on Israel afterwards. Perhaps Israel is even more a hotspot for innovation, the US, and China first. So it's China first, America second here, especially with the red part of the stack, because that's the part of the adult population that is really ambitious and want to set up a substantial new firm of more than 20 employees. Of course, we know that many of them don't reach that, but if you don't have the ambition, it's very unlikely that this will ever happen. And you can see that China is on the outer right-hand side. Almost 2% of the adult population in China has the ambition to grow a substantial firm. While in the Netherlands, it's only 0.5. You might say, well, 0.5 or 2%, that's not such a big difference. But of course, China is much bigger than the Netherlands, and also having not, let's say, just 0.5, but 4 times as many people that have the ambition to grow a substantial firm. So the new TomTom, the new Google, that really makes a much bigger difference than these small percentages might trigger your thoughts. In a sense, we are more like Belgium and Germany, that also have about 0.5% of the adult population having the ambition to start a substantial firm. Sweden is somewhat more ambitious, and the UK as well. And Israel is a very interesting country here. It's almost like the 51st state of the US. And Israel, in many ways, is the 51st state of the US because it also taps into the venture capital system, and there's a lot of brain circulation between Israel and the US. But Israel, in that sense, it has a lower rate of overall entrepreneurial activity, so there are less startups. But don't be blinded by this fact, because probably the most important element is these startups that really have the ambition to set up a substantial firm and to make an impact. And in that sense, Israel being a small open economy, similar to the Netherlands, but with a much more ambitious entrepreneurial population. And my argument would be that that's perhaps even more important than having openness to startups in general. But let me dive a bit more deeply into that and take you through the world of entrepreneurship, or the world of unicorns, as they call it these days. I guess you know the unicorns from fairy tales, but unicorns in the world of venture capital are new firms that have a valuation of $1 billion. So you can say these are substantial firms. At least venture capitals believe that they are really going to make a difference. In the Netherlands, we have one unicorn at the moment. So that's Adyen. I already talked to you about it. So that's a payment service that is very promising in becoming the standard online service for credit card payments internationally. But this is a long list, so several hundred of unicorns are currently around the world. And of course, I guess you would know which place of the world currently has most unicorns. It's the US, but a particular place in the US. Silicon Valley, it's almost like a religion, the Silicon Valley hype. Everybody believes that that's the place where all things happen with respect to technological progress. In a sense, the facts sort of also show that Facebook, Uber, Google all have emerged in a valley. But again, if you look at this place, there are also smaller places if you control for the size of the economy. Sweden with Skype and Spotify, if you control for country size, that is as successful as the US. So they are both in the first league, or the Premier League, so to say. Also the UK, but also Israel. For example, if you use Google Maps and you would like to see if there's a traffic jam or something, this is based on Waze. That was a startup in Israel that has been taken over by Google. And Israel is in that sense more successful than the Netherlands, but also places like the United Arab Emirates, Singapore, and China with Baidu, Alibaba. And on the one hand, you might be wondering, well, China, why is this on this map? Of course, it's a huge country, there's a lot of dynamics. But this map even underestimates the position of China, because China is a huge country. If Beijing and Shanghai would be countries, then it would be better than Silicon Valley. So you have to take into account it's China first, America second, I'm afraid, here. And if you want to look at, let's say, entrepreneurship and hotspots of entrepreneurship in the coming 10 to 20 years, perhaps it's not the best place to go to Silicon Valley, but also to be aware of what happens in China and Israel, for example. The good news is that the Netherlands still has somewhat of a color here, so it's not fully white. We're in the second league. with countries like Sweden. No, Sweden is better, like Germany, France, Canada. So we're doing a pretty good job. I would say second league, not the first league that perhaps we imagined to be. And that's also a bit of the overall entrepreneurship paradox in the Netherlands. So we, in the Netherlands, there's a lot of startups. Setting up your own firm is very well valued. We are experimenting. Personal freedom is very high on the agenda. It's personal freedom. If you look at the international rankings, the Netherlands does better than the US. So then it's Netherlands first, and America not even second. But if you think about how the world has changed, so you using an Apple iPhone, Google, Skype, Spotify, that will also change in the coming 10 to 20 years. And will then be Dutch firms that do that? Well, probably not. American firms, perhaps. But Chinese firms are also very likely to drive this in the coming years. And then we are talking about scale-ups. And the Netherlands does not do the job that it could have done in this domain. So in that respect, for example, Sweden and the UK are doing substantially better, and certainly Israel, than the Netherlands. But you might wonder, well, okay, you're now still fetishizing this Silicon Valley model with scale-ups and unicorns. Perhaps the Netherlands or the Nordics, continental Europe, is still a very good place to live and work. I don't ignore that. And perhaps we should look at different types of entrepreneurs. Employees can also be entrepreneurs. Well, luckily, we also did research on entrepreneurial employees or entrepreneurship. I guess you can't read this at the back of the church. But on the x-axis, we had the share of independent entrepreneurs in the population that we've been talking about until now. And on the y-axis is the share of employees being entrepreneurial. And we found out that entrepreneurs that are entrepreneurial have an even bigger impact on average on the economy than the average independent entrepreneur, because then you have more resources at your disposal. You have to convince your boss that something is really worthwhile investing in. And countries like Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland do very well on this entrepreneurship index. So they have larger firms that allow people to pursue their own experiments, to scale up business ideas. Within IKEA, Hennes & Mauritz, A.C. Brown Boveri, firms like that. The US doesn't do a bad job either, so it's here, and Australia as well, and here's the Netherlands. But if you think about the socioeconomic structure of the Netherlands, you would expect the Netherlands to be much closer to the Nordic countries than the US. So we might have done a better job here as well. So my argument would be that we should perhaps dissolve this entrepreneurship paradox in which entrepreneurship, starting up your own business, being self-employed is very valued and even more normal now in the Netherlands than it was 10 or 20 years ago, which might be a good thing for social and economic dynamics. But scale-ups are really underdeveloped in the Netherlands. And entrepreneurship, well, we do a good job, but we could have done better. And then, of course, the question, also from a science and policy point of view, is how can we solve this not so great position of the Netherlands? So what are the underlying causes? What are the factors and actors that can really make a difference here? So what makes, even though it's a great country for entrepreneurship, how can we change it, and what are the relative weak points of the Dutch economy? And for that, we've developed a so-called entrepreneurial ecosystem approach, which gives you an overview of all the factors and actors that are relevant in explaining the level of entrepreneurship and ultimately also prosperity in a society. And if you would take this framework for the Netherlands, so this is the framework. So we know that networks, leadership, finance, talent, the rule of law, culture, and physical infrastructure are all important enabling factors for having entrepreneurship. And it can be high growth entrepreneurs, innovative startups, entrepreneurial employees. So we're not talking about self-employed here. That ultimately has positive effects on prosperity, so higher productivity levels, employment, and perhaps even well-being. And let me just look for a moment at three elements in the Netherlands that are not so great, so to say, and that we can really improve upon. Because we might think that the Netherlands is a great place to be, and perhaps in some respects better than the US, and that's true. But in other respects, if you really want to stimulate entrepreneurship, experimentation, and also that these experiments are scaled up once they are successful and excellence is being stimulated, then things have to change in the Netherlands. And we can change it, so that's the good news. And just to give you one So a lot of people talk about culture, but as culture being something that we cannot explain, and that is sort of the rest category. The good thing is that we have quite a lot of research over a long-term period on entrepreneurial culture in different countries. And here I used three elements which we've asked in a large-scale survey to citizens of a country, whether entrepreneurship is seen as a good career choice, whether there's a fear of failure that would prevent people from starting up a business, and whether there's a high status to successful entrepreneurs in a society. And you would expect, let's say, positive responses on these questions if there's an entrepreneurship culture, and low responses if an entrepreneurship culture is lagging. Let's look at what the numbers say. Let's take the first one, the black stack. So I should talk very slowly, because otherwise I hear my voice too often. So the black stack. We have Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, UK, and the US. If you look at the black stack, so that's entrepreneurship as a good career choice. So do people value someone else being an entrepreneur? Well, that's very well developed in the Netherlands. About 80% of the Dutch population says that entrepreneurship is a good career choice. And I think that's changed over the last 2 decades. If you would be, let's say, staying next to the football field in the 1980s, and you would say that you would be self-employed, well, people would frown upon you and say, well, can't you find a proper job? Or why are you self-employed? Well, these days, people can really be proud on this and say, well, I'm self-employed. I've taken charge over my life. I've taken a next step in my career. So that in the Netherlands is really valued, and much more than, for example, Belgium, in which only about 50% of the population say that entrepreneurship is a good career choice. Or Germany, at the same level. And Sweden, also 50%. Even the US, which you would expect to be the country for personal freedom and self-employment as a career choice is valued less than in the Netherlands. And then we have this myth that in the Netherlands, yeah, okay, you may start a business, but if you go bankrupt or if you fail, then there's really a stigma on you. So we asked also a question, well, is fear of failure, does it prevent you from starting up a business? And the Netherlands is almost as low as the US. So in the Netherlands it's about 32%, in the Netherlands is 30% of the population that fear of failure would prevent them from starting up a business. So seemingly, well, that's pretty okay in the Netherlands. In contrast to our southern neighbors, in Belgium, it's almost 50% that says that fear of failure would prevent them from starting up a business. So all good news, you would think. But then think about this entrepreneurship paradox. So a lot of startups, but not many scale-ups. And for scale-ups, you also need to value success. So we have this third culture element, high status to successful entrepreneurs. And then you see the strange thing that really lags behind with the other indicators. So in the Netherlands, about 65% of the people value successful entrepreneurs. Well, in the US and the UK and Israel, this is much higher. Even in Germany, this is higher. So here we have an element of our culture in which we like people to experiment, perhaps fail a bit, but not really put ambition and be excellent. And that's really needed if you want to have high impact entrepreneurial activity. Another element, access to finance. Of course, well, we had the first stock-listed firm of the world. We had a marvelous banking system, at least that's what we thought before 2007. And nowadays we realize more and more that our banking sector is really concentrated. So we have 4 big banks, and perhaps that's not the best circumstance to have innovation in banking and have access to finance for SMEs and startups, especially when it's going to be more centralized and there's less, let's say, appetite for risk in the banking sector, or at least appetite for risk in entrepreneurship domains. So this is a graph of the European Union, and you see that especially the cost of borrowing to small loans is very bad in the Netherlands, very high. There are a lot of rejections of SME loans, and also loan guarantees are not working that well. There's venture capital informal is better than the average, but overall it's a bit surprising that such a well-developed country with such a well-developed banking sector, although being very concentrated, does such a bad job in supplying startups and SMEs with proper financing. The good news is that if you look at crowdfunding, that's not in this graph. We do a pretty good job. So the Netherlands is one of the leading countries with respect to the development of crowdfunding. But crowdfunding is really, until now, it has grown enormously, but it's really a very small piece of the finance landscape. So I wouldn't be too happy about the access to finance in the Netherlands. And that's really an important element of a flourishing entrepreneurial ecosystem. And then, last but not least, also coming close to your own position, the good thing about the Dutch talent or labor element is that we have a very highly educated population, very well-developed education system, although I can complain about it as well, but I won't do it today. But there's a relatively low labor mobility. And why would labor mobility be an important issue? Well, if you want to be entrepreneurial, innovate, you have to combine existing sets of knowledge in new ways. And you have to experiment. So you have to set up a firm, recruit new people. When it's successful, recruit even more people. When it's not successful, you have to get rid of these people and to start up over again. And if there's low labor mobility, it's very hard to set up a firm and to also grow this firm. And also to circulate the knowledge from one firm to the other with job hopping. And for example, Silicon Valley is really a nice place in which a lot of this labor mobility happens, which also brings along all kind of knowledge streams and new combinations of knowledge, which leads to all kind of innovations. And in the Netherlands, there's this debate now, especially from the social side, that permanent contracts are perhaps too permanent. So it's the sort of golden change with people that have a permanent contract. There's high labor protection for them. There's a high opportunity cost for leaving your well-established job for a startup or for a more uncertain labor occupation. On the other hand, flexible is too flexible. So we have a lot of temporary workers and self-employed that are in a sort of other system and which are perhaps not investing in their human capital, are not investing in collaboration, which is also very important for innovation and growth. So in that sense, we're sort of stuck in the middle. We made our permanent contracts too permanent, in which people would be perhaps should be a bit more mobile. And the mobile segment is too mobile. The people are not investing in human capital and in networking, which is very important for entrepreneurship and innovation as well. And another remarkable fact is, even though you think that the Netherlands is a very open, internationally oriented society, we've done research over the last decades for international labor mobility of highly skilled people. Luckily, there are a lot of international students, but if you look at the share of the population, of the highly skilled population that's international, so the immigrants in high-skilled jobs, the Netherlands has a very average position in the OECD countries, and countries like Israel, Ireland, the U.S. and Great Britain do a much better job in attracting highly skilled people. And these highly skilled people also bring new views on the world, sets of knowledge that we don't have in this country, and also, let's say, links to other parts of the world, which is very important to internationalize and to explore opportunities and exploit them on a large scale. So it's a bit surprising that such an open, well-developed country of the Netherlands does not do a good job in international labor mobility. And that's really important for having a flourishing entrepreneurial ecosystem. So, rounding up. I was a bit annoyed because there's a great entrepreneurial history in the Netherlands, so why the next hotspot? And the title of my lecture is Making Entrepreneurship Great Again. You would wonder, well, there is a huge increase in startups, so why should we make it great again? Here comes the Dutch paradox, because we have low level of scale-ups, and these are perhaps even more important for long-term economic development and prosperity. And entrepreneurship is pretty high in the Netherlands, and something that is not sufficiently talked about, but it could be higher and closer to the Nordics. And what could we do about this? So we can look back, but of course you are the future and you should work on the future, but be a bit more ambitious than the average student and entrepreneur in the Netherlands. Because if you're don't have the ambition to have impact on society, to grow a business, it's unlikely that it's going to happen. Dutch policy also has a huge task here in restructuring the capital markets and labor markets. And that's not just the Dutch government, but also a lot of private and public parties that should collaborate and should open up the capital markets and labor markets and should also be innovative with new offerings, thinking about new ways of contracting, new ways of collaborating. And more in general, I would say use our creativity to tackle societal challenges, because the Netherlands is a great country to experiment in. A lot is possible, even it's not legal. You can experiment in many ways. There's a lot of human capital, high education, creativity is well developed, but be a bit more ambitious about it. So experiment, but also scale up excellence. And I think then the Netherlands would be a very specific and valuable and useful hotspot in the world, connecting knowledge from all parts of the knowledge of the world, of the globe, but providing the best place to experiment with knowledge to tackle societal challenges, perhaps even better than the Chinese and Americans and Israeli can do. But we need to be ambitious, and once things turn out to be successful, also really push them and make them great again. Thank you.